Vienna, 1907. As the bells of St. Stephen's Cathedral tolled noon and the scent of roasting chestnuts drifted through the snow-dusted streets of the imperial capital, the girl moved quietly through the side entrance of the Hofburg Palace kitchens, her black wool cloak damp from the flurries outside, her hands red from scrubbing copper pots since dawn. Her name was Verena Talbot, and she was the maid who spoke softly, so softly, in fact, that most of the palace staff barely noticed when she entered a room or when she left. But today someone did. "Don't move," came a voice behind her, low, clipped, urgent. Verena froze, the tray of linen-wrapped teacups trembling in her grip. "I'm not going to hurt you," the voice said again. "But I need your help. Right now." She turned slowly, heart racing. The young man before her wore a navy coat lined with gold braid, the collar turned up, his boots tracking mud onto the marble floor. His left eye was bruised and swelling. A sword hung at his side. He wasn't one of the guards. He wasn't staff. He was His Highness, Verena breathed. Prince Emeric of Habsburg-Ehrenfeld, second son of Emperor Franz Joseph, and widely known for his dueling temper, stood in the scullery corridor like a fugitive. Which, Verena realized with a jolt, he might very well be. He winced as he touched his temple. "Do you have a cloth? And God, some ice." Verena nodded quickly, setting the tray down and hurrying to the basin. She wrung out a linen square in cold water and stepped close, raising it carefully to his face. He didn't flinch. Instead, he looked at her, not through her, like most nobles, but at her. "You're not going to ask what happened?" Emeric asked. "No, sir," she said softly. "Not unless you want to tell me." His mouth twitched, not quite in amusement. "Someone tried to kill me. In the stables." Her eyes widened. "I suspect it was arranged," he added, "by someone in court. I only escaped because I pulled my sword first." Verena swallowed. "You should tell the emperor." "I will," he said, "but not yet. I need someone I can trust. Someone invisible." "Invisible?" she echoed. He took the cloth from her hand and pressed it to his cheek. "You've worked here how long?" "3 years, sir. And not once have I heard your name." "That's not always a bad thing," she said quietly. He studied her, then asked, "What is your name?" "Verena Talbot." "Verena." He said it as if tasting something unfamiliar, but pleasant. "I'm going to ask you another favor. There's a letter in my chamber. A sealed one. You'll find it in the drawer of my writing desk. Bring it to me after Vespers. I can't let the guards see me again until I know who I can trust. Will you do it?" She hesitated. "Yes." "You're sure?" I said yes, Your Highness. He stepped back, nodding once. "Then I'll meet you in the conservatory tonight, after the last bells." He vanished down the corridor with a limp in his stride, the hem of his coat brushing the floor. That evening, Verena moved through the palace like a shadow. She knew which corridors the guards avoided, which stairwells creaked, and how to time her steps beneath the chiming of the great clock. She reached the prince's chamber just as the last light faded from the sky. The writing desk was locked, but the key, she remembered it from polishing the brass handles, was tucked beneath the corner of the rug. She opened the drawer and found the letter, sealed with black wax. She tucked it beneath her apron and slipped out. The conservatory was empty, lit only by moonlight catching on the frost-laced glass panes. She waited by the white camellia bush, breath pluming in the cold. He arrived just past the hour, his coat replaced with a dark cloak, his bruised eye darker now, but his stride stronger. "You found it?" he asked. She handed him the letter. He didn't open it. Just looked at her again, as if seeing something more than a quiet maid. "You could have turned me in," he said. "Why didn't you?" "I don't know," she admitted. "Yes, you do." She hesitated. "Because you looked scared." He blinked. "I was." They stood there, the silence between them filled with the rustle of ivy against the glass. "I'm supposed to be unshakable," he said. "A prince. A soldier. A diplomat in training. But every room in this palace feels like a trap." "This one doesn't," Verena said, surprising even herself. He stepped closer. "No. It doesn't." The distance between them shrank. Verena felt at the pull of something reckless and impossible. She clenched her hands to keep them at her sides. "I won't ask you for more," he said. "Not yet. But I need someone like you. Not just for tonight. For what's coming." "What is coming?" He looked at her then, really looked. "A duel," Emeric said. "At dawn. I challenged the Archduke's bastard son." The one I suspect tried to kill me. Verena's throat went dry. You'll be killed. Not if I'm lucky. Not if I have someone who knows how to move without being seen. Someone who can carry a message if I don't walk away. I'm not a spy. No. You're better. You care. She didn't speak. She couldn't. He drew a breath. If I survive, I'll owe you everything. She met his gaze. Then survive. He reached into his pocket and pressed something into her hand. A silver button, engraved with the imperial crest. If anything happens to me, he said, bring this to Count Elsner. He'll know what to do. She gripped it tightly. You'll be there at dawn? He nodded. She didn't say goodbye, just stepped back into the shadows and disappeared. But her heart stayed behind, with the prince who had looked at her not as a servant, but as someone who mattered. The frost hadn't yet melted from the palace windows when Verena reached the edge of the Schönbrunn Gardens. The gravel path beneath her boots was still white, crunching softly as she walked toward the orangery wall. She moved without hurry, but her eyes scanned every hedge and corner, alert to any motion that might betray a hidden guard or courtier. She carried a folded shawl over her arm, inside which she'd hidden the silver button. She hadn't slept. After leaving the conservatory, she'd gone straight to the linen room, where she'd sat beneath a shelf of tablecloths, heart pounding, staring at the polished crest in her palm until the first bell rang. Now, as the sun began to rise over the snow-laced rooftops, she waited behind a yew tree, watching the lower field where the duel would take place. The prince arrived on foot from the west side, alone, his sword belted at his side. He wore a long coat with the collar turned sharply up, and pale gloves that looked almost ivory in the morning light. His limp had lessened, but his steps were deliberate. He paused beside a stone bench and waited without shifting his weight, as if every movement had been calculated beforehand. The other man arrived 5 minutes later, flanked by 2 officers. He bore no family crest, but Verena recognized him. Leopold von Amsel, son of the Archduke's mistress, a man whispered about in the servants' quarters for his appetite for violence and his cold, empty stare. He had a narrow face and a pale scar down one cheek, not from war, but from a fencing match gone too far. Neither man spoke. They stepped to the marked circle drawn in ash on the frozen grass. The seconds moved to opposite corners. Prince Emeric drew his saber first. Verena watched from the shadows, breath held. The blades clashed once, twice, then again in a flurry too fast for her to follow. She saw Emeric stumble slightly on the third pass, and her fingers dug into the bark of the tree. Leopold struck high, missed by inches. Emeric dropped to one knee, then rose swiftly, sweeping upward with a force that sent the other man's blade flying into the snow. Silence. Leopold stood, chest heaving, bleeding from a shallow cut beneath his collarbone. The second stepped forward, but Emeric raised a hand. Let him leave, he said clearly. Leopold spat into the snow and stalked off without another word. Emeric remained where he was, sword lowered, breath visible in the cold air. When the others had gone, he turned his head slightly and said without raising his voice, I know you're there. Verena stepped out slowly, her shawl still draped over her arm. You came, he said. I had to be certain, she answered. You didn't need to see that. I needed to see that you lived. His gaze didn't waver. I meant what I said last night. If I'd fallen, I wanted you to be the one to carry word. You didn't fall. He looked away, toward the city beyond the trees. Not today. She stepped closer, drawing the shawl tighter around herself. What happens now? I've gained time, he said, but not safety. The challenge was witnessed. It was clean. That protects me for a while. But the root hasn't been pulled. Whoever sent Leopold will try again, and next time, I may not be the one holding the blade. You aren't safe here. No. Then leave. He turned to her, surprised. I mean it, she said. Go while you still can. Take your brother's route to Trieste. Book passage to Palermo. Disappear until you know who to trust. He studied her, his eyes searching. And you? He asked. I'll stay. Why? Because no one looks for answers beneath the laundry carts. He let out a breath, the first sign of weariness he'd shown. I never imagined needing anyone. Then learn how, she said. He stepped to her then, slowly, as if afraid that any sudden motion might undo the moment. He reached out not to take her hand, but to brush a stray strand of hair from her temple. Her breath caught, Not from surprise, but from the gentleness of it. "I won't vanish without you," he said. "You must." "I won't." She didn't protest. She only reached into the folds of her shawl and pressed the silver button back into his hand. "You'll need it," she said. He closed his fingers around it. "Will you write to me?" "No. Someone might intercept it." He nodded once. "Then how will I know you're safe?" she asked. "I'll send something," he said. "A sign only you would understand." "What?" He glanced toward the snow-laden branches. "A pressed camellia." She looked down at the bloom beside the bench, the one that had bloomed, absurdly, in winter. "I'll wait," she said. "Not forever," he said. "No," she agreed. "But long enough." They didn't touch again. He turned and walked away, footprints dark against the frost. She watched until he passed through the garden gate and disappeared behind the hedges. Only then did she let herself look up at the sky, where the clouds had begun to break. Not into light, but the space where light was coming. The first sign came with the laundress's apron. It was late February, and the Danube's edge was still caked in ice when Verena noticed the folded linen left on the third shelf of the small storage alcove behind the scullery. The other maids passed it without a glance. But she paused. It wasn't hers, yet it bore her initials, stitched in thread the exact shade of camellia leaf. Inside the fold was a single pressed petal, pale and fragile as parchment. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply exhaled, deeply, once, and tucked the linen beneath her sleeve. That night, she packed a bundle of spare underthings, a jar of balm for cracked knuckles, and a photograph of her mother, faded at the corners. She slipped a note into the seamstress's work basket. Gone to care for a sick aunt. It was vague enough not to be questioned, as long as she returned within 2 weeks. 3 nights later, the bellboy from Palais Coburg handed her a parcel wrapped in waxed paper and tied with coarse twine. Inside, a pair of sturdy boots, 2 railway tokens, and a folded paper with one sentence written in slanted hand. "I have found a place where no one watches." She left the following morning before dawn. The train smelled of coal dust and orange peel. She sat in the last carriage, hands folded in her lap, her cap pulled low. No one asked her name. When she stepped off in Graz, a man in a baker's apron offered her a ride in his cart as far as the southern valley. From there, she walked. The house was modest wooden shutters, a tiled hearth, and a single chimney, no more than a hunting cottage, but the man who opened the door wore a prince's bearing even in shirt sleeves. His hair had grown longer, curling slightly at his collar. He held the door open without speaking. Verena stepped inside. "You made it," he said. "You asked me to. I didn't think you would. I didn't think you'd wait." They stood in the small kitchen. The air smelled faintly of rosemary. A kettle hissed quietly on the stove. He didn't reach for her. She didn't move closer. Not yet. "I brought the button," she said, setting it on the table. He looked at it, but didn't touch it. "They've declared me in retreat," he said. "Officially. The newspapers say I've taken leave for my nerves." "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Not the court. Not the ceilings painted to look like heaven while everyone schemes below. But I miss the horses. The music. The sense that I belonged somewhere. You belong here. I don't know where here is yet." She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small tin of preserved cherries. "Then let's start with dessert." That night, they sat beside the hearth, knees nearly touching. He told her how he'd spent the last 2 weeks learning to cook without burning the bread, how the postman from the village brought back stories from Vienna, most untrue, and how he still woke, once each night, expecting to hear the palace bells. "I told you once I needed someone invisible," he said, watching the firelight. "I remember. I was wrong." She turned to him. "I don't want you to be invisible. I want you to be beside me. Seen. Known. That's not allowed. Not yet." She looked at him steadily. "What do you mean?" "I've written to my uncle in Galicia. He has land. Influence. He owes me. If I renounce my title, he can grant me a position as a state steward. With time, I can make a life there honest, modest. And I can offer something more than danger." Her throat tightened. "You'd give up the crown?" "I was never the heir. But you were still a prince." His voice softened. "And now, I'd rather be a man who chooses freely, completely." She reached across the space between them and took his hand. His fingers were rougher now, warm from the fire, but they closed around hers with the same quiet certainty. "If you ask me," she said, "I'll stay." He didn't speak. Instead, he leaned forward and pressed his forehead to hers. It wasn't a kiss. It was a promise. In the weeks that followed, they built something small and real. She planted herbs in the garden. He repaired the roof tiles after a spring storm. They spoke without fear, not in whispers, but in voices carried freely by the wind through the open shutters. One morning, the postman brought a letter sealed in green wax. Emeric read it in silence, then folded it and placed it on the table. "Well?" Verena asked, pouring tea. "The estate is ours. I've been appointed steward, starting midsummer." She set the pot down carefully. "That's 2 months. We'll have to travel. I've never left Austria. You won't be leaving home. You'll be bringing it with you." She looked at him then, long and steady. "Are you sure?" He nodded once. "I've never been more sure of anything." That night, he lit a single candle and knelt before her with a ring carved from walnut wood and inset with a tiny opal. Not royal, not expensive, but chosen, made by his own hand. "I can't give you a palace," he said, "but I can give you a life." She whispered only one word. "Yes." The estate lay on a rise above the Prut River, its fields rolling into the mist-veiled woods like folds of a sleeping cloak. By midsummer, the wheat swayed high in gold, and the orchard, untended for years, breathed the scent of ripening pears through the open windows of the house. Verena stood at the edge of the garden wall, her hands dusted with earth. The morning's planting had left her sleeves damp and her knees stained. She didn't mind. The soil here was dark, generous. When she lifted her head, she could see the distant ridge where the shepherds moved slowly with their flocks. Emeric's voice called from the side path. "You left your shawl by the pump again." She turned. He was carrying it over one shoulder, his boots unlaced and his collar open, a sheaf of grain tucked beneath one arm. "I was warm," she replied. He handed it to her without comment, brushing a speck of dried lavender from the edge before he let go. "There's a letter from Vienna, sealed in red." Verena's fingers paused on the wool. "From whom?" "My mother." She didn't ask what it said. Emeric handed it to her, unopened, and leaned against the stone wall, his expression unreadable. "She wants to visit." Verena blinked. "Here. She says she's traveling to Lemberg for a charitable reception and wishes to stop by for a brief afternoon." Verena brushed her palms together. "Has she ever traveled without the court?" He shook his head. "Not in my lifetime." "She knows about?" "She knows enough. I didn't hide your name." Verena looked toward the orchard. "What does she expect to find?" "A scandal," he said. "Or a mistake. And what will she find?" He looked at her fully, his voice even. "A woman who speaks her mind in fewer words than most men use to say nothing at all. And someone I would follow into any life." Verena didn't answer. She walked back toward the house, the shawl folded over her forearm. The visit came 3 days later. The carriage arrived without escort, though the driver bore the imperial crest in tarnished brass. The Archduchess stepped out in a traveling cloak of dark plum, her hair swept beneath a netted hat, her gloves ivory rather than white. Verena met her at the gate. "You must be Miss Talbot," the Archduchess said, not unkindly, but with the tone of one measuring distance. "I am." Emeric stood behind her, his shoulders squared like a soldier, though the sun had freckled his face and his trousers bore a patch where he'd knelt too long in the barley rows. They offered tea in the garden, where the bees kept their low hum. The Archduchess declined cakes, but accepted a single sprig of lemon balm in her cup. "I expected something more remote," she said, glancing at the orchard. "This place is almost civilized." "Not all civility comes from Vienna," Verena said. Her tone was level, not defensive. The Archduchess's brow lifted slightly. "You sound educated." "I listened more than I spoke," Verena said. "It's efficient." The Archduchess turned to her son. "And you intend to stay here?" "As a land steward." "I intend to stay with her," he answered. She sipped her tea in silence for a moment. Then, "You've always been stubborn. I suppose I should be grateful you found someone with enough spine to keep you steady." Verena said nothing. She didn't need to. When the carriage left, the Archduchess paused before stepping inside. "You'll have difficulties. The court won't let you vanish entirely." "I don't intend to vanish," Emeric said. "I intend to live." That evening, as the lights softened across the fields, Verena took the ledger from the sideboard and opened it to a blank page. "We have 83 pear trees," she said. 47 are bearing. We should consider culling the rest. Emeric looked up from the hearth. You want to keep accounts? I want to make this place thrive. If we rely only on what we remember, we'll forget something important. He rose and crossed the room, laying a hand on the open ledger. Then let's record everything, he said. Even the quiet days. Especially those. She looked at him, the weight of the moment pressing gently rather than heavily. I never thought I'd be content with less than what I imagined, she said. But this isn't less. It's more than I ever earned, he replied. They didn't need vows. Not then. The decision had already been made, with every seed sown, with every silence shared. Outside, the orchard leaves turned silver in the wind. Inside, two people built a life not from inheritance or decree, but from the steady courage of choosing each other again and again, until the choosing became its own kind of crown.